Hi, my name is Chris Rassam, real estate investor and business entrepreneur. And today I'm going to be interviewing Galen, and we're going to be talking about the architected life. Galen, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, Chris. Yeah, thanks for sitting down and chatting for a bit. My name is Galen Belinsky, and I've been in ministry for a number of years, pastored in a couple different churches, and I'm currently in the process of leaving my season of ministry out in Arizona to go be launched out to Pennsylvania, which is where my wife and I are both from, starting a new ministry work out in the area where we're both from originally.
Awesome. So today we're talking about the architected life. And this all happened with me and Galen going to have lunch before he takes off and leaves us over here in hot Scottsdale, Arizona. And the big thing that stood out was we were talking about how you architected your life and made these decisions to move from Arizona to Pennsylvania. And that's what brought us here today, because we were talking and we said this content is just so good that we want to be able to share this out and get this out to everybody so that you can start thinking, how do you want to architect your life when it comes to your career, when it comes to your family, your ministry, anything you're doing, you're going to want to build a plan around that. So that's what we're going to be sharing today, a little bit of that discussion that we had and Galen's journey. So to start out today, what is the problem that most people are trying to answer when it comes to planning out their lives? Or do most people just fly by the seat of their pants?
Yeah, I mean, speaking as a guy who's kind of been there for a long time, I mean, I was always a guy that kind of flew by the seat of my pants, for sure. I thought I was setting goals and casting vision, but really when it came down to it, I was just taking one year at a time, one season of life at a time. And different people are more goal-oriented than others, but I know for me, what I've gone through over the past several years is, if I'm being really honest, coming to terms with the fact that I wasn't a good life planner. Even though I wouldn't have said it, I kind of was somebody that was just flying by the seat of my pants, going from one season to the next, whether it be job, whether it be moving here, moving there, doing this. And there are some good things when you're young and you're not married yet. You can kind of do that. But I started to see a little bit of a deficit of not casting some really good planning and vision for my life. And then went through a really lengthy process, doing a lot of exercises, seeking a lot of wise counsel to really look at, what's my calling? What is God? What are the desires God put in my heart? Because I do think, especially young people, need to be really, really wise about where they are in life and what their unique callings and giftings are. Be as realistic about that stuff as possible and start casting some vision for the future. As you're young, you don't have to have every year planned out, but starting to get a sense of what is my goal and mission and purpose in life. Start asking those questions. The sooner you start asking that, the sooner you can begin a process of just hearing from the Lord on those things, and then walk through a much more intentional, and we use the term, architected life. Nobody sets out to build a house and says, well, let's just show up at the job site and see what happens. Now I'm going to plan it out. It's like, how many square feet do I want it? What's the purpose of the home? Is it for, an older retired couple or young family? All those things. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of funny. On the way here today, I was thinking about that same analogy. And if you'd build, and
I'm a carpenter by trade.
You're a carpenter. Yeah. So if I want to go build my dream house, where do I start? I have to start with a piece of land that's flat, and then we got to go in there and we got to clear out the brush.
Right.
So I feel like the brush is kind of the distractions that we have in our head, just everything from being distracted by social media, by whatever it may be that's just filling us up every day and taking us off track of our plan that we want to accomplish. But once you have that land cleared out, then you have the architect build the plan, and then we're going ahead to design our dream home.
Sure.
So in the same way, when we design our dream home to be what we want it to be, we also have to architect our life so that it is what we want it to be. And that includes different rooms. We may have, you got your master bedroom, you have your family room, you have your entertainment room. So I feel like even when we architect, we're having different rooms like your family. You have the room of your career, you have the room of your hobbies.
Right.
And what do you want this whole house of yours to look like? And how do you want that to apply for the next, 5, 10, 50 years? And I think one thing, especially with, let's say, people in their 20s, a lot of them don't know exactly what they want to do. They're still searching, which I think is okay. I think a lot of people don't have a lot of great direction or have good mentors that will sit them down and help them just think through a lot of these questions. So hopefully we'll be able to pose a lot of these questions here today in this talk.
Yeah. And again, yeah, thanks for having me. I think, again, right on the outset, like, I'm not here, Chris isn't here because we have all the answers and we've done it right. If anything, I'm here as a guy who hasn't done it right, but can maybe kind of share my story and share a little bit of guidance and advice for other people. And especially my hope and heart is always the younger generation.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. So going back to defining what is the architected life, we define that as life with mission, with vision, and with purpose. You brought up a couple Bible verses from Proverbs, which is the book of wisdom. What did you find from the book of wisdom? Yeah, I'm a big Proverbs guy. I live there a lot, kind of on that reading plan where I'll read the chapter a day. There's 31 days in the month, 31 Proverbs. But there's kind of two proverbs that I've always kind of put together. There's a proverb that says, "Many are the plans of a man's heart, but it's the will of the Lord that prevails ultimately." The GBV, the Galen version. But it's like we can plan things out, but it's the Lord's will that's going to be done ultimately. And that thought is kind of like, well, I've read that in my younger years of like, why plan too much? Because it's just the Lord's will be done. It's kind of out of my control. So just pursue everything with a lot of passion and see where it goes. But then there's another proverb that says, commit your work to the Lord and your plans will prevail. So it's like, the Proverbs, it's the wisdom book because it doesn't give any absolute principles. It gives guidelines and kind of some general principles for life. But it's really both those thoughts that planning it's a little bit of a cadence. It's a little bit of a dance of like casting vision from my desires. What do I want? What are my passions? What are my strengths and weaknesses? But then also giving it up to the Lord. Say, Lord, what is your will? And there's never a season in your life where you sit down and you go, boom, this is it. I think casting vision and planning is a process of constantly looking at what God has put in you and where he's put you in life. What are the desires of my heart? What do I want to do? But then also listening to the Lord, what do you want out of my life? And kind of putting those two thoughts together, I think results in a lot of intentional planning for the future, but ultimately saying, all right, now what's the Lord going to do with this? Yeah. Galen, what was it that triggered you to want to pursue the architected life?
Yeah, so we were talking the other day and I shared this story. The thing, we've kind of been going through a real process for about the past year and a half or so. And it triggered, and it started about a year and a half. My wife and I were actually taking a work trip to a conference out of state, and we were at the airport, and her mom had come out to watch our son. We have 2 kids now, but only 1 at the time. Actually, we might have had 2 kids and just not known it at the time, but different story. So we had our son at home with grandma, and it was the first time that we had ever both left to do an overnight trip out of the house, and our son was home with grandma. And we were literally at the airport going, if this plane crashes, what happens to Judah? And it was like, we had asked that question, like, where would we leave Judah? But we had never like actually written it down and told anyone. And it was kind of a silly thing, but like that thought of like, man, if we were to die today, what's going to happen to our child, to our legacy? And I feel like a lot of good questions and a lot of good things come from considering what happens if I die today. Yeah. If you don't know Jesus, ask yourself, what's going to happen if I die today? Insurance agents, retirement planners, all those people are going to ask you that question. But that literally triggered like, really, what do we want to happen with our children? What's the legacy we want to leave behind? And it was like, it wasn't necessarily pursuing the architected life, but it was this question that really stirred a lot of things. And the thing that was interesting, as we went through a whole list of people that we had talked about, we would leave Judah with this person or that person, it ultimately forced us to say like, well, where's like the impetus of where's kind of the bulk of the energy of our family? How would we want him to still be raised to live out who we are if we're not there? And ultimately, the thing that kind of triggered a thought was it would be with a family friend back home in Pennsylvania. And it was like, well, if we would send Judah there, how are we living that life here in Arizona while we're alive? And nothing was concluded, but it just started. It was a lot of probing questions that it asks you deeper questions, and it forces your gaze a little bit deeper inward and a little bit further outward in terms of time. Yeah, and I think what we're bringing out today is awareness, and that was your trigger for awareness in your life, where, hey, I'm just thinking through, hey, if this plane goes down
and me and my wife are in it, and we're going to go meet Jesus, who's going to raise the kids. And I think that's the number one trigger that we should all have, is that awareness factor of, okay, well, I want to plan my life this way. And it starts with that little seed of hey, awareness. Mm-hmm. So when you were aware of that, what steps did you take to start building out that process? And I know it was a little bit of a journey, but can you share that with us?
Yeah, for sure. So again, asking that question, and we were literally on the plane, I was texting a couple people, this constitutes, our legal will. Don't do it. Don't do life planning.
This is legal and binding.
Yeah, this is a legal and binding statement, But then from that, like I coming back and through that summer, was really working on finalizing our mission statement as a family. And our core values. I've always been core values minded. When in my teen years, I read a lot of business books and entrepreneur books and things like that. I've always had that kind of streak in me, but never all the way fleshed out. I was always a really lousy, wannabe entrepreneur, visionary person. So that I was like, we really need to figure out like a family mission statement and our family core values. So throughout the summer was kind of really nailing those things down, and it was a really good process. What are you all about?
Yeah.
Like everything needs to have a mission. Every good business, every good organization needs to state, what do we exist to do and accomplish? And when it's all done, how do you know if you did well or not? Mm-hmm. You should ask that yourself. You should ask that of yourself for your life. What does your life purpose? What's it set out to do in this world? And when your life is over, when your eulogy is read at your funeral, how do you know whether or not that's been fulfilled? If you don't plan it, if you don't know what it is, then it's just whatever.
Yeah.
So that year we kind of finalized the document, and again, it's maybe a little bit of a living document, might change over the years, but we came up with 8 core values and a decent mission statement, and just started to cast some vision for what we want our family to do and be.
Can you share with us the vision and the values?
Yeah. So our mission statement, the Belinsky family exists to impact tomorrow by adding value to today, to glorify God forever. So everything that we do, I want to be adding value everywhere I go, to my organization, my employer, my coworkers and those around me, to friends. Yep. I hope this conversation adds value to your life and adds value to your lives. But I don't want to just add any type of value. I want to add the type of value that makes tomorrow a better place, both here in this earth and ultimately in eternity. I want to add the type of value to the created order, to the world, that makes tomorrow in this world and eternity with Jesus a better place. I want more people to know Jesus through my life and the value that my wife and I add to this world, so that there's more people with Jesus in eternity, or so that people are walking with their, advancing their walk with Jesus, so that eternity is a better place to ultimately bring more glory to God. So it's like I want to add value everywhere I go, so that tomorrow and eternity is a better place, so that God gets more glory. And that's kind of the thought of our mission statement.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because I've been on the same bus of wanting to add value. And it started for me as a real estate investor. I do value add projects. So I'm trying to find real estate, commercial properties where I can go in and add value. And as I continue that process, I'm like, okay, well, I'm investing in properties to add value so that they're, worth more. But also I want to add value to the relationships and everybody around me, and doing that in different ways, adding value to you, adding value to, to people around me. If we're doing this should be adding value to everybody listening, not just for us. So I think it's really crucial in life to be able to add value to other people, because if everybody was adding value to everybody else and we're not just taking and taking and taking, the world's going to be a better place.
Totally.
And part of your statement and vision is you want to add eternal value to people by knowing Jesus.
Ultimately, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
great.
And again, I want to add value to the world, and and I want people to be, enjoying life and having better marriages because they're friends with me or whatever it is. I want there to be a temporal impact as well as an eternal impact. So,
awesome. Can you share with us the vision that you had? You said you had a vision when we were talking in your 20s. and then now it's starting to be fulfilled, but you didn't realize it was going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, it's interesting how it works when you're going through these things. And again, I was 36, 37 going through this process. So, middle of life, depend on the age of your audience. Maybe I'm young, maybe I'm old, but whatever. I was not in my college years figuring this out, but it was good doing it in my 30s, asking these probing questions, starting to think deeper. And a lot of it is even that. There's a good talk by Simon Sinek, what is your why? So really just spending this season of just going deeper, casting vision for life. God actually brought a lot of things to mind that he had passions that he had given me, words that he had spoken to me in my younger years. And I remember I had another moment in life when I was like 22 years old. I grew up in a Christian house and was a Christian, but it it wasn't a prodigal season, but I spent a couple years of my life wandering away. And when I was around 22, really kind of came back to the Lord and started taking life a little bit more seriously. And that was a really good catalyst in my life. And that first started thinking more intentionally about what I wanted to do. Didn't cast as big of a vision as, I wish I'd cast further, but it was good steps. But I remember I had a really big passion again, and that's where that seed of that seed was planted in my mind of I want my life to exist for eternal value. I remember thinking at the time, I just want my life to make an impact in eternity. I didn't write it down in terms of a mission statement, but that seed was planted, and I thought you're 22, 23 years old. I was like, I'm just going to do the most extreme thing. I just want to make a huge impact for Jesus.
Go be a missionary.
Exactly.
Move to Africa, go live in the bush, and be the missionary over there.
That's it. Or go to North Korea, someplace where everyone else is afraid to go, or something like that. And I was willing to do something radical for Jesus, and wanted my life to be, I wanted it to mean something and be used for something. But the thought came to me, and I was kind of in the more Baptist world. I'm a Baptist at my core. I really, can't change it. If you cut me in half, saw me in half, count the rings down to the core. I'm a Baptist, at my roots. But I'm more of a charismatic Baptist now. I wouldn't identify as Baptist, but
a little more well balanced.
I hope so. A little more well rounded. Listening to the Holy Spirit, walking with the Lord. I wouldn't have used the term at the time, but I really think it was the Lord speaking to me, saying you will be a missionary to America. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. America is the heart of Christianity. We're the salt and light to the rest of the world.
We could definitely use some more missionaries now.
I know. Fast forward, when I, what was this, 15 years ago, that thought didn't make much sense. But it's your mission is to try to help the American church. And again, not that it's I'm the Jim Elliot of America and they need me, but it's that's where my efforts are going to be poured into to help build the American church and help bring the gospel and the light of Jesus essentially to America, which at this time didn't make sense. But when I look at where we're going through today, I say, okay, yeah, actually America does need some good, strong churches. A lot of them are taking some crazy left turns, really going off the rails, shy, cowardly, afraid to speak up, and kind of just pushing themselves out of any relevance or meaningful impact to the world. So it was interesting how God started that in me even then. And at the time I went to Bible college, and that was my launch into ministry. But I can see it more full picture now of what I think God was doing.
Yeah. So Solomon in the Bible, author of Proverbs,
yeah.
The book of wisdom. God asks him, ask anything of me and you'll have it. And what did he ask for?
Ask for wisdom.
For wisdom.
Yeah.
So we're going to take some more verses out of Proverbs when it comes to vision, just because I feel like they're really impactful. And if we're looking to be wise and have wisdom, we need to be able to incorporate the book of wisdom, which is Proverbs from the Bible. So one verse that we looked at was Proverbs 19:1, which said, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." So we have our ideas, we have our vision, but it's what God's going to do is what's going to stand. But also, why should we have vision? Is it important for us, especially as male leaders, as men, to have vision? We had Proverbs 29:18 says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." So what happens to the man that gets married that has absolutely no vision?
So I think that's a great question, and I think this, for me, really understanding vision was a big kind kind of a paradigm shift for me, because I think we understand like goals and we understand planning and aspire to that, and everyone kind of understands the idea of like pursuing your passions and looking at the desires of your heart. But like vision is seeing a future that doesn't exist and then doing the work to make that future that you can see in your mind happen and make it a reality. And that is something that everybody has a vision. And I guess my short answer to your question is, if you don't cast vision, then you're working to build somebody else's vision, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think the Lord does have plans and goals and purpose and vision for every one of his kids. And what I'm trying to do now, and what I would encourage a lot of, people listening, especially the younger generation, is really seek the Lord's vision. That proverb says, without prophetic vision, or without vision, the people perish. If you don't look ahead at what you're doing and what you're building, what every day that you work, every hour that you spend is building something. If you don't understand what that is, and if that's not something that's ultimately coming from the Lord, it's just in vain. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that build it. That understanding what that is, getting that blueprint from the Lord, is vision. And I'm not just talking about the Bible, and I think that's what he's talking about, because the second part of that verse says, this is where there's no vision, the people perish. The second part of that verse is like, but those who obey the law of the Lord are blessed or happy. So it's talking about obeying the Bible, but I think even more than that, God has a specific vision like for you in your life, and that's different than the vision and purpose he has for me in my life. And I think really spending a lot of time to seek what that is and listen. I think God wants to tell us what that vision is, but it's not just a one-time thing. It's a lifestyle, and it's a lifelong journey of listening to the Lord, maybe pivoting your plans, maybe repenting of some things you need to repent of and fix, or maybe taking the work to do some things that he's calling you to do. But hear what it is that he's calling you to do and be specifically for the vision that God has in your life. And the cool thing about it, because God's a father, he planted desires and passions in us. It's literally like a dad helping his kid decide what he wants to do for life. It's like, it's not just what I want. It's like, it's helping take the desires in your heart and steering them in the right direction. That's the heart of God.
Yeah, and God has given each of us gifts individually to be utilized, talents, gifts. So you have different talents, and gifts than I do. I can barely, use a hammer, but I can pay a guy that knows how to use a hammer. You're building whole studios. So, and then we utilize those gifts for our lives and to bless other people. So part of your vision was looking at 2 tracks that God gave you, and the 2 tracks was business and ministry. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So again, last year was going through a big process. We finished the family core values, the family mission statement, and then another exercise, which we'll talk about in a second, because another part of this is I started meeting with my wise counsel. And then at the kind of the culmination of a lot of these exercises, and I'll share a little bit of the backstory. I had begun to feel that I was approaching a season of transition in the current role that I was working at. So I work at a church in the Phoenix area, and it's an amazing ministry. It's one of the most vibrant, life-giving faith communities that I've ever been a part of, really rapidly growing. And I had a really awesome role. It's like every single week I get to walk away going, man, I was a part of something like really incredible. Like it's a great team, getting Bible teaching out, and just a faith-filled, Holy Spirit-led community that loves Jesus. So it's like a really amazing place, but I started to have this feeling that like, I don't think I'm in the right seat on the bus, to use kind of the good to great analogy. I don't, like, it was good for a season, and I feel like God was doing something to me, but it was time to do something different, but I had no idea what that was.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that meant like another job at the church or moving to a different church, or so. Again, that was the thing that kind of prompted a lot of this stuff. So as I was really praying through a lot of things, doing a lot of exercises from some of my wise counsel in life, I feel like sort of a type of conclusion came down from a vision from the Lord. And this wasn't like, John on the island of Patmos type of vision, but it was like an idea that I feel that God had given me, basically saying, after I'd gone through all these things, casting vision, what do we want, what are our priorities? Our life is to be like a train, and one train, our family, because the other thing is like I'm married now with kids, so it's not just about me and my goals. It's like you need to do things as a family. God is not calling you just to do your own thing. If you're married, He's calling you to do something with your spouse, so that both of your needs and callings and desires and priorities are all together in one thing. So I felt like it was a vision that like our life is a train for Jesus and for ministry, and it's to raise our family and our kids to know the Lord and to be sent out into the world, and our vocation and all of our energy is just to bring glory to God. Kind of flowed out of the mission statement, right? But I felt like this vision of just like our life and family is a train, career, hobbies, everything, but a train sits on two rails. You know, it's one track, it's one thing, but it's two rails. And for us, I felt like that the two rails was like a vocational ministry that we were starting and leading, our own vehicle to do formal vocational 501c3 ministry. And I wasn't sure what that meant. Are we going to plant a church? Are we going to like do pro-life ministry, work? My wife has a big passion for that. We had a million ideas, but it was like, so I didn't know the specifics, but I knew it was like a train, vocational ministry, a formal vehicle for doing that, and then a business, like an entrepreneurial endeavor that's like the family business. And they're two things that are going in the same direction, advancing the same mission. And then ultimately, like I hope and pray that the business would fund our family ministry to free us up to do the things that we want to do and fund other ministries as well. So like I feel like it was this big conclusion that's like, okay, our life is a train with a business and a ministry. Okay, now what? What's the business and what's the ministry? So it was like, it was a good breakthrough in terms of like the vision, but it wasn't done yet,
Yeah. And it's funny that people might think that you're doing too much, but biblically, we see Paul in the New Testament, who wrote 60% of the New Testament. That's exactly what he did. He had his job, and
he was a tent maker.
Yeah, he was a tent maker, and he wrote 60% of the New Testament.
Right.
So,
and he was visiting the churches and helping them, coaching them, rebuking them. 1 Corinthians, stop sleeping with your mother-in-law type of stuff. He's doing all that stuff. But he had seasons where he was completely funded, and he talks about that, to do ministry, to take his missionary journeys, because it costs a lot to do that. And then he had seasons where he was focusing a lot on doing his vocation, building the tent so that he could pay his own bills. I think he did both ways at times. He always tried to not put the burden on churches. He mentions that several times throughout his writings, but yeah, he had a season where he was actually making tents so that he could fund his own ministry.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for the Christian to identify your career, and we'll talk about your calling, and then also identify your spiritual gifts. So for ministry, for churches, how are you serving? What are you doing? We're all called to serve in some capacity, in some form. So try to find out. And part of this is that a lot of people can barely make it through knowing what their career is, to let alone try to figure out, hey, what's my spiritual gifts to be able to serve others in ministry.
Totally.
But I think part of this encompasses that portion of, hey, let's try to figure out your life. Let's try to figure out your ministry. Let's see how are you blessing everybody around you. And it doesn't have to be you opening up a church. It can be you just hosting, loving others, just.
And I actually think a lot of it's really good if it's not just church related. I think Jesus needs to own everything. He does own everything. His people need to start acting like it. So use your business, use your life, use your job, use whatever it is to be a platform for reaching people for Jesus and advancing His kingdom wherever your sphere of influence is in life.
Yeah. And Jesus wasn't just at church or at the temple all the time. Jesus went out and spoke to the sinners, spoke to the people that truly had a hole in their soul that needed Him and that needed that eternal life.
Right.
And he freed them. He gave them his love, His mercy, His grace, His forgiveness. Pick up your mat and walk. And people were healed. So
He wasn't doing it just within the walls of a religious building. Yeah.
So it's important that we get out in the marketplace, we get outside of the bubble of just the church buildings, and that we're able to serve others in different capacities. So tell me about the 3 buckets. Part of your homework was creating 3 buckets, identifying the ways that you want to structure your life. Can you explain those 3 buckets and what that looked like?
Yeah, This was an assignment from my pastor, and it was probably one of the most helpful exercises that we had gone through. And the idea of it is when you're at a crossroads in life, and I was looking at like a career change sort of thing. Don't just look for the next opportunity. That's
every entrepreneur chases the next rabbit.
Exactly.
Yep.
The next shiny thing that comes along. And actually, as I look back at life, that really was what I did. Like at 22, I'm going to make my life mean something for Jesus. And I just went to the first Bible college and it was great. I'm really glad I went there. It was an amazing spot. And then I went to New York City because there was this really incredible ministry. And again, I'm really glad I went there. God blessed that and used that. But don't just look for the next opportunity and think, oh, this would be great. This would help me make enough money, or, do this thing that I love. You need to think more intentionally. This is where the architected life was a little bit of a step further than just the mission statement and the vision and values. And it was the assignment was come up with 3 buckets, and in each of these buckets, you're analyzing your main priorities, your passions, and your calling. And not just big picture. Try to be specific about those things. And my pastor gave me this homework assignment kind of in the context of that actually changes throughout the seasons of your life. He says you're entering you got one kid who's almost 3 years old and a newborn baby, so it's like you're in the child raising years. That's different from the empty nester season. That's different from the retiree season. That's different from the single season. So it's in this season, what are the priorities? And don't just look for the next thing, but ask the questions. And in the A bucket, it was all the things that you absolutely have to have in life. And that's kind of a difficult question to ask. And it's not just I need to make this much money. Don't just think career. It's things like, what are you going to do for schooling? Do you need to live near a Christian school? That's going to be a priority. Do you need to make it so that your wife doesn't have to work? Or do you want her to work? All of those questions. And it's for different people, it might be you need to live in a certain part of the country. One of the questions we were wrestling with was going back to that thing that happened on the plane. Do we want to move back and live closer to family so that our kids can grow up with cousins and grandparents and things like that? So what are the priorities, the specific things? Try to be as specific as possible. And it's not just my passions. It's what are my commitments and my responsibilities for what I'm doing? And that's where it's consulting the Word of God. I'm called to be a husband and a father first. So what do I need to provide to raise my kids in the world today? So there's a lot of things like that. And what you do, you come up with all these things, and don't think of the buckets just yet, and put everything down on a paper. And in the A list, it's I have to have these things. I will not go without these things. It's if you're buying a house, it's I will not live in these zip codes. I'll only live in these zip codes. So it's your realtor, don't even send me listings in this zip code. I'm not going to live there. Or it's a 1-bedroom house doesn't work. I got 4 kids or whatever. It's I can't budge on these things. And then the B list is other things I'd really like to have these things, but I'm flexible maybe on the timing. I'm flexible in exactly what they look like, and I don't need every single one of them. But the B list is secondary priority, and then the C list is if you could have everything. What's the cherry on top? If God gave you everything, what would it be? But realistically, I could live without some of these things. Get your
private jet, get your yacht, get your Ferraris.
If those things are on the A list for you, you might need to reassess some priorities. But what are the passions and things like that? So I got that homework assignment, and I was oh, this will be easy. Let's sit down and do this. And it was actually a really hard assignment. And it wasn't oh, let's knock it out this week. It literally took months to do. Because like I said, a lot of those things, as you ask yourself these probing questions, and it was helpful for us to have our core values and our mission statement done, because that informed the priorities. Kind of figuring out what those things are, and were they the A bucket, we have to have these things. The B bucket, well, we want some of these things, but we're sort of flexible. And the C bucket, this would be the chair on
the
top.
Wish list.
The wish list, yeah.
Now, you said that having those helped you filter out what you can say yes to and what you can say no to in life.
Yes.
Give me an example of that.
So for us, one of the things that we decided was we do think we want to start our own ministry. So a vision of that train track, it was we're called in this next season to launch our own ministry and business. So it's like, and I didn't know exactly what that meant at the time, but that filtered out other things, like when we were talking about other positions at the organization that I was at, well, that kind of ruled that out, because I've kind of discerned there's a desire in my heart that I prayed through, that we cast some vision as a family, that we feel God is calling us to step out and start our own thing. Mm-hmm. Well, that rules out another good position at the organization that I'm at now, even though it'd be like a fun job and maybe a great fit and super exciting and, you know, safety because we don't have to leave. But when we realize, oh, that actually is kind of an A-list priority, the A bucket, it filters out a lot of those opportunities. And that when you have your mission, your values, and those priority lists, it's the best filter for deciding really how do you discern the will of God in this case? Well, it's like, God is like, I spoke to you on your mission and your values and some vision and priorities. Use that as a filter to discern those things. Mm-hmm. And it helps you to live more of the architected life. You know, this is what we're building. Well, this job doesn't help us build that. It might help us build another good thing, a really good thing, but we've decided this is what we want to build.
So share with us your next journey. You're moving forward. You're going to be moving to Pennsylvania in how long? A week now? 2 weeks?
Yeah, a week tomorrow. Yeah, 8 days, I guess. Yeah.
So I'm going to miss having you around here.
I know. You're going to miss a lot of people out here.
But share with us your next journey. Where are you going to be going? So you shared a little bit about the ministry side. Share a little more about the business side and how those two come together.
Yeah. So again, this was a big process. And also throughout there, it was a scary process. And there were times where I felt like I had enough vision to like know kind of what we're doing. Yeah. But then it was like, well, I have no idea what the next step is or what the thing is.
And you guys were praying through all this, waiting for God to give you something that would line up with those buckets.
Yeah. And there's a little time when it's like you don't fully see the next step, and you are definitely walking in faith. Because in my case, I'd actually told that. There was really great, situation with the church that I work with. So we were able to have this conversation right out in the open. My pastor was being my mentor. Mm-hmm. All the pastors were. So it was a really great spot. But I got to the point where I was able to say, yeah, I don't think I want to talk about another position here. I think I want to go and do my own thing. It's like, okay, so now we start the process. But I didn't know what it was. So it's like, okay, am I going to be out of a job at some point and not know what the next thing is or whatever? So anytime you're doing this, there is an element of faith. But God is good. And if you're hearing from the Lord and He gives you this vision, He's going to guide you. Like preaching to myself and everyone listening. But we had a prayer group that we meet with every single Friday. And I had one specific opportunity in Pennsylvania with a friend of mine, one of my best friends of 20, 25 years. And Randy.
Yep. I keep hearing about Randy, which I got to meet Randy someday.
You'll meet Randy, come out to Pennsylvania. Yeah. Actually, come out next month. We're doing our launch service on August 14th. Come out and check it out. But yeah, had a neat opportunity with Randy because I had gotten a little bit of, it was a vision. Last time I was out there visiting him, he has a beautiful property. He owns a vineyard, estate, and he has this structure on his property that he built to be a wedding venue. And basically he stopped doing weddings at his winery. It wasn't beneficial to his business. So he has like this wedding venue that goes unused. And like, this is before I had even thought about transitioning out of my current role. I was like, man, you should start a church here or something. Like there's a really neat opportunity. And in that area, like they could really use like the type of church that I'm at in Arizona. If you could take a slice of that and plant it out there, it would change the region, it'd be pretty cool. So I was like, but I wasn't like seriously considering doing it. But God had given me a vision to do an Easter program in that space, in that venue space. And I told Randy about it, and he was like, no, if you want to do it, come do it. He's like, sure, door's open, come do it anytime. Long story short, he asked me if I would help him do it, and I'm on the other side of the country, but so he kind of took the idea and ran with it, and everyone there was excited to do it. He did an experimental Easter program, and had a really, really good turnout. It was like almost 400 people came to this one-off event at a church service Easter program at a winery.
That's great.
It was kind of a totally outside of the box idea, and then I knew it was going to happen. I'm like, this thing is going to be a success, and then everyone's going to go, well, what next? Mm-hmm. And it needs to be grown and spun off and cared for. So I kind of like, I saw that coming and I was like, man, is this something we're called to do? I really didn't think so. Because I had known we're called to start a ministry and a business. And then in this prayer group that I meet with, I was kind of praying like, Lord, throw out a fleece. I'm like, let somebody in this prayer group say or see something about a winery, because there's a lot of, the Lord speaks in that group and speaks in visions, and things come up during those times of prayer. And there began to have this theme of like, the church needs a new wineskin. So this theme of like a new wineskin coming. The church needs a new wineskin. This is going to be a year of shaking for the church, is kind of the word, as we're just kind of casting vision for 2024. And started to see this thing all develop. And then there was this theme of like, what needs to happen is like clusters of prayer groups. And then there was this big thought that emerged of like, it's another ministry that helps mobilize church efforts and things like that. So their word was like, the wine is in the cluster. So we need clusters of basically believers coming, doing life together, fellowship, not just big congregational meetings, but people need to be serious about meeting, gathering, praying in clusters. So all of a sudden there's like these wine themes and stuff, and vineyard themes. There needs to be a new wineskin. And then somebody actually had a vision. It was like, I picture you at a winery. And I was like, okay, this is kind of like the fleece moment now. It's like, maybe we're supposed to do this. Sorry, this is a little bit all over the place. But so we did the Easter program. God was kind of speaking through this prayer group a little bit, starting to see something happen, but it still didn't have like the train track piece, the ministry and the winery. I couldn't picture how that would all work. So I was talking with Randy, kind of recapping the Easter event, and he's like on cloud nine because it was amazing, good turnout. The gospel was clearly preached and people responded really well. And now it's like, now we got to do something. And he was kind of like, man, you really should like think about coming out here. I was like, if you were to come out and run with this, like, he's like, I'm a business guy. He's got his own audience. He does a lot of podcasting. He was like, I don't want to be a pastor though, but you should. So I'm like, yeah, it doesn't quite fit. It's like, it's half of the equation, but I don't see how it would all work. And he basically was like, what if I helped you start your own winery? Like, I didn't really, like, how would I do that? He's like, he calls me GB. He's like, GB, for me to help you start a winery, it would be super easy. He's like, I've got enough extra gear and equipment and ideas on my property to spin off another winery super easy. He's like, I'll help walk you through the process. I'll be your coach. I know the licensing. I know the supply chain. You don't need land. You can just, make the wine and create a brand and start a storefront. He's like, I know the perfect location. And it was like in this one conversation, it was like idea after idea after idea. And by the end of like a 1 hour talk with Randy, it was like, there's this idea that could have like the business and the ministry all in one. And it's like this perfect, it's exactly the train. And we started reading through the priorities list, and it was like, oh, well, we'd also be closer to family. That one I think was on the B list, but it's like, okay, there's a B list item. It's like, we'd be able to start the ministry, we'd be able to start a business. So it was all of a sudden the A list, B list, and C list were coming together, and the train vision that God had given me. And it was like, it would help us live out our values and would help us advance our life mission. So we fleshed out the idea, met with wise counsel, ran it by my pastors and things like that. Again, got some, hey, think about this, how would this work, how would this work? And then as I talked through it with all of my wise counsel and mentors in life, it was like nobody thought it was a bad idea. And this idea just started to emerge, and things started to fall into place, and the church said, well, we'll help you, launch the nonprofit. We know a great attorney, and we can help, get you off the ground with that, make it really easy, help you with some of the costs and things. And they were like super generous. And then Randy's like, well, I'll help you start the business. I know, like, I'll be your free coach to help you start a winery. I was like, to have Randy be my personal coach to help me start a winery, like that's an incredible opportunity. And all of a sudden this idea emerged. So we've launched and incorporated what we're calling Vessels Ministries. And the idea is we're just vessels of service to the Lord. There's a passage in 2 Corinthians, Paul talks about like being used to help bring people to Jesus. Even though we're weak, even though we're not worthy, God uses us. We're just earthen vessels. We're just jars of clay, which are like the not great vessels. We break easily, but God can still use us to do amazing things. So that's our heart posture as a family. Lord, use us however you will. So we're doing Vessels Ministries, and we're going to just do some services, Bible studies, not launch it as a church yet, but go out and follow up with all of that energy in that area There's a lot of interest for people for a new wineskin ministry, and that was one of the words spoken over us. So we're going to launch a new wineskin ministry, doing a lot of ministry things, services, Bible studies, worship and prayer nights at my friend's winery at that old wedding venue, repurposed wedding venue, and we're launching a winery company as well. So I've launched Taste and See Wines. We're currently in the licensing process to get our license in the state of Pennsylvania and with the TTB, the government federal agency, and we'll be starting just as like a storefront, kind of like a wine cellar, country shop, wine lounge type of thing, like a tasting room, but get that business going, hopefully grow that business, eventually get land and do the winery, but have the business be able to fund ministry. So we're doing a bivocational work, kind of 100% on each thing, all in both areas, but able to get that family train moving in the same direction. My wife and I are going to work at both of these things together, whereas before she was teaching a really incredible job with incredible people. Really actually sad to be having that season end, but instead of like me having my thing and her having her thing, we're doing one thing together to advance that train. So we've been working on the process over the past several months, moving next week, and launching our first ministry event in about 2 weeks after that, and hoping to have the business open and licensed by the middle of September, which is about 6 weeks from now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's amazing to see how God worked through that whole process. And this is why I thought this was just such good content, because we're able to take some really good steps and then see in your life how God worked with that and how God delivered to what you wanted because you created that vision and then God helped see that through.
Totally.
So
yeah.
What's really important though is you started from the top creating your mission and your core values, and then you structured out your priorities, your passions, and your calling. And then you waited to see what God would deliver, and you prayed through that. And then the business and ministry were essentially handed to you on a platter.
It really was.
That kind of shows that God is working through this. And I just think that's an amazing story. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks for hearing it, and thanks for asking me. We did lunch, and they were like, "Hey, let's do a podcast on this."
This was too good to keep to ourselves.
Let's record this. But yeah, and I do want to say, like I said this at the beginning, I'm not a guy that like has all the answers and like you listen to the these 12 steps from Galen Belinsky because I've got all the answers. Like I really don't. I really don't. But it was a step of faith. I'm glad we did a lot of those things and received a lot of wise counsel, and we did take action. So that would be my word to people listening, like just get going in operating from a deeper level, from calling, mission, and purpose, operate from your why, but take a lot of time. It was ultimately over a year and a half process of really coming to a place where we could start to move in a sense of God's calling and vision, but it was work that's worth doing.
Yeah.
And we'll follow up and see how it goes,
Yeah,
just at the start of it at this point.
That's amazing. So as far as creating action steps for everybody watching this, I want you guys to take the next steps and draw this out for your individual life. So I want you to go ahead and draw out your core value. I want you to draw out what your mission statement is in life, and I want you guys to create 3 buckets, bucket A, B, and C, and put your must-haves, your maybes, and your wish list together. And just start praying through that and start identifying and seeing what God has for you in your life and where can you be fulfilled even more by your purpose and your calling. And I think it's super important as well and crucial to have other mentors around you and people that you can talk to. Galen, you had not only were you praying and asking God to just show you these things, but you also had great mentors and people around you that would validate what you were doing. And then to end off, if you were to give, let's say, somebody in their 20s one piece of advice today, what would you tell that person listening?
A young person in their 20s, one piece of advice. You told me this question. I wasn't ready. Edit this part out. Whoever does the editing, don't let this long pause because I'm going to think on this for a second. This does not go in the recording. One piece of advice would be learn to hear from the Lord. Yeah, because like you'll get all kinds of great ideas. There's great content out there. There's the Good to Great. There's the Mentor Myth. Simon Sinek has some great content out there. There's so much amazing content on how to cast a vision for life and business and entrepreneurism and things like that. And that's all great to take in, but learn to hear from the Lord. Yeah. Read His Word. I'm a big Proverbs guy. God reveals Himself. It says in James, if you lack wisdom, and you do, be honest about it. Ask the Lord. He gives it graciously. More than anything, learn to hear from the Lord. Get in the Word. Spend time in prayer. Again, I'm not talking as a guy who's some holy roller who has it all figured out. But learning to discern the voice of God is the most valuable thing, especially as you're casting vision. Amen. If you're young, do I go to college? Do I do this? Learn to hear from the Lord and discern His voice. His sheep know His voice. Hear His voice. It is the best advice that will never steer you wrong.
Awesome. No, thank you for that. Yeah, and our challenge to you is, we have the action steps, but our challenge is read through the book of Proverbs. Pick up your Bible, look it up online, book of Proverbs, and it's only 31 chapters. You could read it pretty quickly, gain some wisdom, and read through that and comment what you have learned. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for today's podcast video, and we will see you guys next time.